the story would actually start off with Kateria Leviathan. She would have been embarrassed. She had basically been humiliated. Her family name, it was taken away from her, and it was turned into some sort of title. She and other descendants of the ancient devils were trying to fight for their birthrights, but unfortunately, not even one of them were able to win against these new Satans. Kateria would have been frustrated, but she wouldn't quit. I'm sure she had basically been exiled after her humiliating attempt at trying to fight for the throne, but she would figure out a way to get her revenge. She wasn't a quitter. After all, she had heard about there being another ancient being, which was supposed to have a similar strength to the first devil, Lucifer. Well, for all she knew actually, this devil could be even stronger than him. The only issue though was, well, they seemingly weren't a part of this realm. This being was just not part of their realm for some reason. She couldn't explain how that was possible. They were some sort of demon or like some sort of devil, but at the same time, it seemed that they were completely built different from the rest, as if they were completely detached from the rest of the Satans. As if Lucifer had no hand in creating him at all. It was possible that this devil could have actually been there before, who knows. For all she knew, this devil could have probably been the actual creator of devils. For all she knew, this could have been the actual first devil. Or he and Lucifer were just there at the same time. The two of them were always there, it's just that Lucifer decided to hang around Earth while this other being decided to travel the dimensions more. Kateria would decide that she wanted to find out more about this being, so over the years she would try to learn more about him, and she would also learn to try and summon him. There would be multiple unsuccessful attempts though, but she would not quit. Eventually she would actually end up successfully summoning this being. Once she managed to summon him, he manifested himself as a charming silver-haired male with facial hair. Kateria would end up being intrigued with this being. She would end up actually bearing one of his kids in the long run too. But after the birth of this kid, that she ended up deciding to name Issei, Trigon, well, he would reveal his true form and power right then and there. But rather than being horrified, Kateria would show the exact opposite reaction. She was seemingly excited. She was just floating up in glee, which would confuse Trigon for a second. But she would explain that in her eyes, she had just produced the offspring to a devil of an incredible amount of power. She herself was a devil, and on top of that, she believed that her child had the greatest amount of potential among her species. At least in this era, for all she knew, there could probably be stronger beings in the future, but as far as she was concerned right now, Issei had the greatest potential in order to reclaim the throne, be able to reclaim their family name, basically take back their birthright, what was rightfully theirs and no one else's. She had waited so long to exact revenge, so when it came on to raising Issei, she really had no issues with that. She found that she could probably wait a couple more years. After all, she had waited for so long in order to exact revenge. also trying to just wait a little bit longer in order to make sure that the strongest being would actually be to par with, well, the rest. Basically she had no issues waiting, because she knew at the end of the day she would basically be waiting to create the strongest being to ever step foot on the planet Earth. That was basically what was going through Kateria's mind at the time. She would also be disappointed though when she found out that Trigon showed no interest in helping her take over the underworld. It would have been disappointing, but she could understand that he had other things to worry about. Well, he was probably like the most powerful being to really step foot onto this planet, so why would he concern himself with such trivial things in comparison? He should be trying to take over the world or something. Why bother for just one measly realm when he can take over all of them? She would just let Trigon go on to do his own things. It wasn't like she could stop him, but she would try to raise Issei. It wouldn't be the best sort of parenting though. Over the years, Kateria wouldn't be like the most caring sort of parent at all. She would actually force Issei to learn how to wield magic from an early age, when he simply just wanted to play with her. She wanted him to be as strong as possible after all, stronger than even his own father. She would tell Issei stories about his father over the years too, and she would make sure Issei would truly figure out his place within this world. It was to be able to take over the underworld, and if he could not do that, he would be considered a failure. Simple as that. So Issei would end up learning how to wield fire magic. It actually seems like he had an affinity to fire magic. It actually seemed that he had some sort of affinity to fire magic, considering how breathing fire was one of the very first abilities he learned. Issei also ended up finding himself capable of wielding both dark and water magic. Kateria would be overjoyed when she saw Issei eventually go on to achieve their family's bloodline ability, that being the Sea Serpent of the End. This ability would have been first revealed when Issei actually turned into a large serpent-like dragon while the two of them were sparring. Kateria was beating him senselessly, and in response Issei was getting tired of the beatdowns. He was annoyed. He seemingly snapped at that moment, and he would have lashed out against his mother in this new form of his. With this form came other abilities as well, one being a blue and black aura that he was able to shoot out of his own mouth. Kateria would move out of the way only to witness the amount of damage Issei was able to cause in that form. Kateria would smile. She would have found Issei to be ready at this point. She would leave Issei at a random pike and figure he could fend for himself from here on out. He was 12 years old at this point. It didn't take long for Issei to grasp the situation and go on to figure out a way to survive moving forward though. Issei would brainwash an older couple and have them believe he was a child. He would even take on a mixture of some of their features as well in order to make it more believable to outsiders that he was their kid. Issei would continue training from there on out with his magic over the years, and he would actually get a hang of this dragon form of his. He would be enrolled into school, and in all honesty, he found it to be really boring. He would abandon the couple and wipe away his existence too. He would go back to his original form, and he would go on to simply explore Japan. He would learn to survive on his own until he one day decided to go back to school. He had nothing better to do after all. For the longest at this point, Issei was simply journeying all throughout Japan, stealing food, going to some shelters, and basically disguising himself as an average Joe from time to time, grabbing an apple or two, and just trying to keep his head up for most of the time, and slowly building up his strength as well. But now that he decided that he wanted to go back to school, give it another shot, he would actually brainwash another couple in order to enroll him into another school. When comparing his age and the standard age for a person per grade level, Issei would end up finding himself being enrolled into Kuo Academy. Issei, while at this academy, he would end up discovering something off about the school. That being with the fact he could sense people who were like his mother here, and where they were seemingly devils. He would go on to investigate and find out about a girl by the name of Rias Gremory. Her last name. It sounded familiar to him for some reason. He would actually remember how his mother used to always talk about how he would surpass all of the devils in the underworld, including people like Sir Zex, the Gremory clan. He, from his understanding, basically was the one to take over the Lucifer title. And the most recent additions to the Gremory family were actually Sir Zex and Rias Gremory. They were the ones to actually wield the power of destruction, thanks to their mother being part of the Baal clan. Well, originally anyways. Issei would actually get approached by Rias one day though, and it turned out that she had also had an interest in Issei. She would remark about the fact he seemed to be different from the others at this school. She would whisper into his ear, mentioning the fact that he was a devil, and well, he would try to deny it at first, trying to keep a low profile, but Rias would see through his act immediately. Issei would eventually just give up and admit it. Rias would smirk. She would actually request for Issei to join their peerage in exchange for keeping his secret. She could tell that he was strong after all, but Issei would refuse, and he would actually poke her forehead in response. A strange symbol would appear before disappearing almost as soon as it appeared. Rias was now under Issei's control. Issei, he didn't care for his mother's grudge against the underworld, but he did care about creating a strong lineage. The girl seemed like an average teenager as far as Issei had observed beyond her, well, of course, being a devil. She would have been 17 at the time she fell under Issei's control, while Issei was 16, and throughout the next year Issei would begin to take control of the school. He found their teaching system to be pointless, and that it would be better to simply learn something that they'd actually use in the great big world. You know, things like knowing how to defend yourselves would be really useful for real life. Who knows what can happen to you. For all you know, you can end up getting mugged one day, or some people challenge you to a fight. You need to know how to fight in order to protect yourself in this world after all. And that was basically Issei's logic. And so, he would decide to be the one to enforce a new order onto the school. He would brainwash the principal in order to create new rules for the school. And the teaching system would actually be completely thrown out the window for the academy. Many teachers, they would have actually had complaints with how everything was suddenly being handled, but Issei would have a little talk with them. That talk involving him basically wiping their memory of any involvement with the school. It would have only taken a month to clear up those issues, and Issei would move on to make his presence known throughout the rest of the school. Issei would start out with simply fighting the kids at his school in order to show dominance. He would then create a hierarchy within the school, with him being at the top. There would be groups who would attempt to stop Issei, such as Sona's peerage, but they would all be defeated in the end. Issei would subjugate each and every last one of them. He would also be able to tell that these were people who were just on a different level from the rest. He could tell that there were always going to be some people within the school built completely different, and he was able to tell it with Sona's peerage as the very first ones. He could sense the devils within the school, and he knew that they weren't the only ones. Rias had been subjugated by Issei for the longest now, so she was easy to control at this point. So he would make sure to request for her to gather all of the devils within their school. It had been 3 months since she had been put into Issei's control, so any form of rebellion from her was gone at this point. So Rias would simply do as Issei said with no questions asked. She would return with her own peerage and Sona Citri's own. Issei would actually turn them into as generals in a sense. The uniforms for the school would have been changed to appeal more to Issei's tastes, with him being the only one not to wear a uniform. It was basically meant to show that he was above all of them as well, the fact that he was the only one not wearing a uniform. But he would actually be wearing a hoodie and ripped jeans most of the time instead. Over the next 9 months, Issei would force the student council to enforce his laws for the school. It would affect every grade level, and those that stepped out of line would regret it almost immediately as they would get beaten down by said council members. Sona did not want to do this, but Issei was simply too strong for her to do anything against. Sona would have felt humiliated with all of what was going on. Sona would feel bad for Rias as well. She remembered the girl used to always be hot-tempered, but ever since Issei joined the school, she changed. Rias was quiet most of the time now. She obeyed everything Issei ordered her to do, like some sort of lapdog. Sona would have found out why a month into her own subjugation by Issei. She couldn't believe that Rias would have actually been brainwashed into listening to such a guy like Issei. She would have figured that it would all be over soon though, when Rias turned 18. Sona remembered the fact that Rias was actually basically what ended up happening is that Rias had been distraught for a while now, due to the fact that she was basically going to be getting married when she turned 18. When she turned 18, she was basically going to get married to this guy by the name of Riser Phoenix. She was already engaged to the man because of something about wanting to make more pure devils or something, stronger devils or whatever you wanted to call them. Rias didn't care though. She hated the guy. She absolutely despised him. And Sona remembered that as well. She figured it would all be over though once Rias turned 18, since of course they would need to be able to get her married to the guy known as Riser Phoenix. And she figured that they would also need to be in the right mind. Once doing that, they would also need to get the attention of Sir Zex Lucifer. Once they got the attention of Sir Zex Lucifer and Riser Phoenix, they'll be able to get rid of the brainwashing and also get rid of Issei's rule over the school. And once they were able to do that, then it would just be smooth sailing from there, just slowly bringing the school back to normality. A year passed though, and Rias would become 18 years old. A magical circle would appear one day in what used to be the Occult Research Club. Graphia would appear out to the portal, and she would observe the situation. There would have been some reports of some strange activity happening within this school after all. Graphia would look around and find that the school had been completely flipped on its head. Graphia would end up finding Rias and questioning just what was going on. Sona would have been close by though, and she would run over to Graphia, greeting her, before explaining the situation. Sona saw this as her home to get out of the situation now. She didn't want to report the situation to the higher-ups until now, since she thought, that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way out of this situation, at least beforehand. And, well, throughout the months, she ended up finding that she was wrong. There was simply no way out of it unless she were to report this to the higher-ups. Her best luck now was with getting the information passed on to Rias's older brother. Graphia would be sure to inform Sir Zex of the situation, but Sir Zex wouldn't be the one to actually step in. Serafal would have been the one to request to speak with a boy known as Issei. She would have teleported to Kuo Academy and find a boy in an empty cafeteria doing push-ups. Serafal would interrupt him and introduce herself. Hearing her last name would cause Issei's eyes to widen. At first he would think that she was related to his mother in a way and point this out. Serafal would be surprised hearing who Issei's mother was, but she would deny having any relation with the woman besides having the same last name as her. In Serafal's case, though, the last name was more of a title than anything. Kateria was a bloodborne Leviathan. Bloodborne Leviathan. Serafal would prepare to have to fight Issei, but the boy would simply shrug hearing this. Serafal would be surprised at the little reaction the boy had once she explained who she was. She figured that he would want to fight her as much as possible, try and seek some honor for his mother or something along those lines. It seemed like something Kateria would try and enforce into the kid's mind from early on, so she was confused as to why he didn't want to fight her. Issei would explain that he could care less though about his mother's grudges. In his eyes, she was a terrible mother to him. She always trying to force her burdens onto him from when he had only just begun to utter his first words. Serafal would question him about what he did to the school, and Issei would explain that he made it better, and where the kids would learn practical things for when they went into the real world. Learn that life wasn't easy, and that you had to be creative with the scraps you were given in order to survive, and in some cases, thrive, in order to make it to the absolute top, make it to the pinnacle of the human world at the very least, by enduring the hardships within this school. If the school was harder than what real life was going to be like, then life was going to be a breeze for them afterwards. Once they graduated from this school and gone on to deal with the real world, it would basically be a breeze for them. There would be absolutely no worries when it came on to trying to land a job or anything along those lines, because of the fact that they had already endured so much from Issei's rule that this was easy in comparison. It was basically like living on hard mode for all of your life and then switching to normal mode right after. That's basically how it would have been for the kids. That's what Issei's goal was. Hearing this, Serafal wouldn't really know how to respond. she would instead decide to move on to further business. She would actually offer Issei the opportunity to form his own peerage and have personal training from her, so long as he agreed to join her faction. That faction being, well, the Devil's faction, or like the New Satans, or something along those lines. And something else that she wouldn't have necessarily mentioned to Issei though was the whole thing with the Chaos Brigade. The Chaos Brigade was a group that was actually causing quite a bit of trouble for the three factions. Knowing Issei was the son of one of the members of the Old Satan faction was concerning for Seraphol, so she would try and make sure that he would join their faction before it was too late, before the Old Satan faction was able to fully corrupt Issei. Issei would hear the offer, and he would think about it. He could tell that this woman was strong, so he would actually agree to the bargain. Seraphol would of course been relieved. She didn't want to risk another person joining the Chaos Brigade and acting Trigon's will, especially Issei, considering the fact she could tell he had a high amount of potential just by looking at him. She wondered who Issei's father was for him to have such a high amount of potential. It rivaled even Milikis's own. And he was the son of the strongest queen and Sir Zex Lucifer. With the agreement being made, she would report back to Sir Zex the new situation. Issei would have been made a king and given evil pieces, only for Issei to request Rias's pieces. Her peerage would be converted into Issei's own with the exception of Rias. Sir Zex would request for Issei to actually relinquish his control over the redhead's sister, as she was supposed to be getting married soon. Issei wouldn't take too kindly to these words, and he would explain that Rias was his, and that the only person she'd ever marry would probably be him. Sir Zex would get frustrated, and he would explain that the engagement was made to unite the Phoenix and Gremory family. But Issei, he wouldn't care. He would be willing to actually fight whoever Rias's old lover boy was, if it meant he could continue to have his control over her. Sir Zex would sigh and actually schedule a rating game between Issei and Riser a month from now. Issei, hearing the time he actually had to train his peerage, would actually make sure that absolutely no time was put to waste whatsoever. During Issei's rule, Konako would have been forced to be in a Nekomata form at all times during training. She would even begin to act more like a cat from time to time, thanks to Issei's influence. Kiba, he would have been Issei's messenger boy, and of course one of his enforcers as well. One of his most heavy enforcers, you could actually say. His swordsmanship would have improved by leaps and bounds while fighting Issei, due to him having to constantly adapt to the boy's abilities. Akeno was of course another one of his enforcers, probably the most brutal of his enforcers too. And she would have actually also been Issei's maid for the most part. She would have actually ended up forming a more sadistic personality during this time though. She would only hold back when it came on to close friends and where she only slugged them in the shoulder. Others, they weren't so lucky. She would actually go on to step on some of the students with a smile on her face. She would have some of them bow down, and she would use them as some sort of stepping stone at times. Just use them as a sort of sidewalk or something, just showing her superiority to them. She would hear their cries of pain, and that would continue to put a smile on their face. But But unfortunately, this wouldn't have just been something randomly that ended up developing. No, this would have actually been Akino's coping mechanism after finding out that the devils wouldn't do anything to help their situation. In fact, they only made it worse by making Issei their new king. They were also training for a rating game in order to decide whether Rias would continue to be mind-controlled by Issei or be married off to the jerk that was Riser. Finding a best friend was nothing but a husk at this point would deeply upset Akino too. She would have no choice but to give in to her more sadistic tendencies. She would have ended up going back into her more sadistic tendencies in order to avoid going through a mental breakdown. Or well, she kinda did. This was basically her mental breakdown at this point, and she would have found comfort in seeing the pain on others' faces. When it came on to Gasper, he would have been taught by Issei personally in order to gain better control of his sacred gear, and eventually find himself giving into his more dark tendencies as well. After all, he was part vampire, so he was given into that nature now. He would of course start to drink some people's blood, but he would know when to restrain himself. At the very least, he would only do it to a couple of kids at a time at school, but when it came on to his teammates, he wouldn't actually do that. He wouldn't actually drink their blood. No, he would be too scared of Issei to do such a thing. Issei's training was harsh as well when it came on to Gasper. Gasper was able to basically freeze people in place. He had some sort of time-related sacred gear, and it also dealt with his eyes as well. So Issei would have basically been working on trying to improve that, trying to improve how long he can hold something in place regardless of its size. And of course, Issei would make sure to train his physical body to the utmost limit as well. By the end of the month, Issei would have boosted his team's morale by actually explaining that if they did well in this rating game, he would be willing to loosen up the restraints he had on Rias to where they could communicate with the girl again. She would still be completely subservient to Issei though. Hearing this, they could agree to those odds. The group would go out into the field and they would attack Rise's peerage, doing a number on each and every last one of them. Issei would find Riser and pummel him into the ground. He would find out that the blonde had regeneration though. This was apparently what the Phoenix clan prided themselves on, but Issei would find a loophole around it. He would mess with Riser's mind, compromising the effectiveness of the blonde's regeneration. He would find out right then and there that although Riser's body may have basically been immortal, his mind surely wasn't. It wouldn't take long for Issei's team to win the competition. Issei would also be a man of his word though, in where he would actually release the restraints he had on Rias. Well, sort of. He would loosen up the restraints, giving her a personality once again. It would only really show when talking to the group members though. The group could handle that for now. But the next situation would be when two girls from a church, one with basically two giant pigtails, I shouldn't say giant, but very long pigtails, and sort of orange-like hair, and another girl with blue hair, with one green strand. They would have actually ended up going to the school and end up finding the occult research club. they would have wondered just what was going on there, and Rias would actually be the one to approach the girls, wondering what they wanted. This would of course been under Issei's orders as well. He was watching everything that was going on from her eyes. And the girls would explain the whole situation with Excalibur. Kiba would have also been listening in, and he would be interested. He wanted to join in on this operation. Issei would end up hearing how well Kiba was interested in joining these girls on their operation in order to basically take down whoever stole Excalibur. And Issei would be skeptical at first. He would eventually just allow the boy to go and help the girls though, after he fought them and basically showed that he was above both of them in terms of strength and speed. But of course, Issei wasn't exactly the most trusting of people. He would make sure that the swordsman boy was being watched at all times. And if this boy ever decided to slip up, he would make sure that he would regret it immediately. When we last left off, it would have basically started off with Erina and Zenobia basically checking out Cool Academy. Basically just trying to figure out what had just happened. On top of that, what ended up happening here now is that Erina and Zenobia would have been bested by Kiba in a fight. And Kiba would have been interested in basically helping the two in their search for Excalibur, basically to find the culprits behind the theft of Excalibur. They would end up taking Kiba with them after they had lost that fight. Issei would order for Akano and Rias to actually keep a close eye on him though. Issei had a bad feeling about the boy, this feeling being that he would pull a fast one on him. It would turn out that Issei was right for not trusting Kiba later on though. Kiba would have actually tried gathering allies in order to dethrone Issei. He would have told Erina and Zenobia his plans in hopes of them joining his cause. He recognized them as strong in their own ways after all. Individually, they weren't nearly as strong as Issei. They didn't really hold a candle to Issei whatsoever on their own merits. Well, if they were to fight him individually. But as a group, he had a feeling that they could maybe overwhelm him. They felt that there was a bit of a chance if they fought as a group, as a team you could say. But Rias would actually appear behind Kiba, resting her hand on his shoulder. Once he felt the hand on his shoulder, Kiba's body would immediately stiffen up. He would go cold at the sudden realization. He would slowly turn around to find Rias and Akano smiling at him. He could practically feel the malicious intent behind those smiles though. Rias would apologize to the two girls for snatching up Kiba so soon, but she would explain that they had other business to attend to at the time. Kiba would be brought to Issei. He would have shown a lack of emotion though. He would simply stare down Kiba before a light shot out of Issei's eyes and struck Kiba. Kiba would scream as he could feel his mind being swayed left and right. Eventually, it would end up with a symbol similar to the one Rias got resting on his forehead. From that moment forward, Kiba would have been Issei's perfect soldier. No personality whatsoever. They would follow his orders to a T, and Issei could control the blonde's body from afar, pouring some of his own power into Kiba in case he was ever in a pinch. Issei didn't want to do this to the swordsman, but Issei wouldn't let an act of subordination, well, insubordination, slide so easily. Issei would test out this new Kiba's loyalty by sending him back to find Irina and Zenobia. Kiba would continue to assist the girls, but when asking about the creation of an anti-Issei strike force, Kiba would act as if he had no recollection of it. The girls would find this to be pretty odd, but they would focus on their mission at hand more. They would eventually find the culprits behind the theft of Excalibur. Issei would have been watching from Kiba's eyes, and he would notice how skilled these girls were. He had become even more interested in their capabilities now. Although Freed managed to escape, Issei would recognize that it wouldn't be the last time they saw the man. He wanted that maniac killed as soon as possible. To him, Issei just found Freed to be a nuisance, something that would be better off dead than alive. And of course, Issei would also end up finding the broken and battered body of Irina with a note attached to him. Well, attached to her at Issei's doorstep. He would have picked it up, and it would have read that it was basically informing him to actually head over to Kuo Academy's courtyard, unless he wanted the rest of his classmates to end up like this. Basically, all the kids within Kuo Academy could end up just like Irina if Issei were to refuse this match, if he were to refuse to listen to their orders. Issei would be curious to know who was actually strong enough to hurt the girl in such a fashion. He would oblige, although he would be sure to bring his peers with him during this. It could be a good learning experience for all of them after all. At least, that's how Issei viewed everything. Issei would end up meeting the ex-fallen angel leader, Kokobile, there. He would find out Kokobile's goal in all of this was to simply start a new war that he found. Well, basically it went a little like this. Kokobile's goal in all of this was just to start a new war, a whole new faction war, because of the fact that he felt thrill in each and every last one of these wars. Every day you're not knowing whether or not you're going to survive, or if this fight is going to be your last. Kokobile adored that. He found peace to be boring, in all honesty. Issei wouldn't waste his time trying to fight the lunatic though. Once he heard his reasoning, he would just order Akeno to do that in his place. Akeno would nod before smiling creepily. She would shoot down lightning at Kokobile and create an ice blizzard around him. She would continue sending more lightning within the blizzard due to ice's conductivity with the electricity. It would continue to shock Kokobile. Akeno would have also learned some dark magic from Issei and this time living on the streets. So of course she would end up using a spell that created 1,000 needles poking into the fallen angel before releasing a series of carnivorous ants into his bloodstream. Kokobile would die from the inside out. Issei would whistle before acknowledging that Akano did some good work against that father boss. Issei would also see Kiba drag the unconscious bodies of Zenobia and Irina. He figured that knocking them out would have been a lot easier now with the reveal of the fact that God was dead and Irina already not being at 100% condition to begin with. Issei would summon 2 pawn pieces, using 1 piece per girl, converting each one of them into devils. Issei would turn to Akano afterwards. He would inform her of the fact that he wanted her to actually train the girls this time around. Akano would nod in understanding, but hide an evil smile not even a mother could love. The girls would be scared from the training regime Akano would actually have in mind for them. They were still getting over the fact their lives were a lie up until now after all, but being pushed into this sort of situation wasn't helping them in the slightest. Issei would watch the display from time to time, and it would amuse him to no end seeing the absolute despair in their eyes. After the betrayal of Kokubio, the 3 factions would end up finding themselves and some sort of proposition to be made. Basically, they would have found that in order to prevent something like Kokubio from happening again, it would be best to sign a peace treaty with each other. So of course they would host a meeting to do such a thing. Issei would join simply to gauge the strength within the room. He needed to know just how strong these guys were, and just how far he had to go before he could surpass them. The meeting would get interrupted though by a familiar face, Kateria. Seeing her son at the meeting would absolutely enrage the woman. She would roar at her son, calling him a disgrace to the family name. Issei would show no reaction though. Kateria would try to go in for an attack, trying to harm her own son, but Azazel would get in the way. The fight would be turned into one between Kateria and Azazel now. Issei, during all of the commotion, would walk over to Valley Lucifer, who was leaning on the wall, watching the light show between magicians and the 3 factions alike. Issei would introduce himself to Valley, sensing that the boy was of a similar strength to his own. Valley, finding out that Issei was apparently the son of a descendant to the ancient Satans, would find him to be relatable to an extent. He would introduce himself as well, establishing the fact that he was the White Dragon Emperor. Issei would also hear about how apparently he wasn't the only one with family issues. The boys would bond over the fact that they both had family issues and end up exchanging contacts after everything was over with. Issei would be offered the opportunity to go to the underworld and check out what would be in store for him there by Seraphal afterward as well. Issei would be lying if he said he wasn't interested, if only to see what was all the hype around it by his pathetic mother. Issei would find it to be a rather cool place, but nothing to create a whole war over. He would just rise up in the rankings the traditional way if he really wanted to be at the top. He wanted to be in Sir Zek's position one day after all. He would have some fun in the underworld and learn more about its culture as well. He would be invited to some young devils gathering or something along those lines to celebrate their development and the development of many other young devils alike. He wouldn't really care for the party all that much. As far as he was concerned, he was there just to be there. Issei would notice Konako begin to drift away from the crowd though. She was about to walk through the exit, but he would actually whisper for her to come back to where he was standing though. It would be inaudible for pretty much everyone else, but Konako would be able to pick up on what Issei had said. She would freeze in place before turning back around. She would approach Issei, and he would actually rub her head affectionately. If he hadn't to be at this party, then so did she. It was as simple as that. Only time she'd get to leave is if she needed to use the bathroom, of course. As far as the racing games went, for different peerages, many of the young devils would pale in comparison to Issei's group. Sona would simply forfeit her match against Issei. Sona did not want to fight Issei at all, considering how she was aware of his strength. Diodora, he was more cocky though. He was unaware of Issei's capabilities. As far as he was concerned, he figured he had a good chance against this boy's group. He was wrong. Very, very wrong. You see, what ended up happening is that Issei would pull out a lawn chair and he would just watch as this peerage decimated Diodora's own. At one point, Issei would specifically request for everyone to cease fire except for Irina, Zenobia, and Kiba. He wanted to see the fruits of Akino's training after all, and the two girls, and when it came on to Kiba, he simply gave the command to protect the girls from any sneak attacks. They would embarrass Diodora. The girls feared Akino for how harsh she was with their training, even though it did give results. They feared Issei even more because of the fact Akino listened to him, which meant that he must have been at a whole nother level of terrifying for someone like Akino to submit to him. Diodora's morale would have been completely stolen from him at this point. The girls would corner him and force him to give up. Diodora would lock himself in a room after that match. Issei didn't really care what the kid did so long as he established his dominance in this realm as well. The whole Loki situation would be of no concern to Issei though. He would have been back in the human realm doing 50-pound curls in the school weight room when Seraphal would actually appear with a giant wolf. She would tell Issei about the whole situation with Loki and how they settled it. Once they were done with Loki, she realized that the wolves were still left over. She figured Issei liked animals, so she decided to give him Fenrir. Issei would turn them into his familiar and train them up as well afterwards, after thanking Seraphal for the gift, of course. During one of his training sessions with his new familiar, Issei would end up sensing that there was something wrong. He would look through the eyes of Rias and Kiba to see what the problem was. He would find a black-haired Nakomata wrestling with Konako, confusing Issei. He would teleport to their location in order to stop the fight from escalating. He would break the two apart and knee Kurika in the stomach before dropping her on the floor. Issei would ask Konako for her story, and it would be explained that the black-haired Nekomata was apparently her sister. Issei, hearing this, would figure Kurika also had a lot of potential. He would recruit her as his pet, though. Konako was already showing signs of surpassing her sister in terms of strength anyway. Issei wouldn't go into Kyoto with the current setup of his school, and instead Issei would be bored. So bored actually, he would check up on Valley one day for a second, only to find him in Kyoto in his place, well, destroying everything. He wouldn't be too concerned with the reasoning for why, though. In all honesty, Issei was a bit jealous. It seemed like Valley was having the time of his life in Kyoto, but he shrugged. It was Valley's business, not his. Issei would be curious to learn more about his lineage, though, and he would question Seraphol about there being any other members of his family, at least, well, more specifically, any family members that weren't crazy, like his mother, of course. He understood that she wasn't a legitimate Leviathan herself, but he figured there was a chance the woman did keep track of some of the devils within the underworld. Sure enough, she would actually lead him to an area where there was a girl in what seemed to be a coma. Seraphol would clear up the details with Issei. It would turn out that this girl was actually a distant cousin to him, and that she fell into a coma after contracting a sickness that was seemingly incurable. Issei would have had access to other forms of magic beyond most devils' comprehension through him being Trigon's son. He would tap into the dark arts at this moment before chanting a spell. Minutes later, Ingville would actually awaken, only to be confused as to where she was. Issei would do his best to catch her up to speed about everything. Since they were family, Issei also wanted her as part of his peerage. Inni wouldn't accept. Well, she would accept, and she would take around three pieces to be turned into his pawn. Issei would also find out that he would be fighting Rias's cousin soon. Basically, he would find out that he was going to be fighting Rias's cousin soon. Well, according to Seraphol, at least. And of course, this would have been after he added his cousin to his roster. Issei would test out his cousin's strength and would find that she was rather strong for someone coming out of a century-long coma. He would have been expecting for her to be able to only throw weak punches at best. It was amazing that she could even stand to begin with. Issei would hear about her having a sacred gear and group her up with Gasper and Kiba afterward. After all, these were the types of people to really have sacred gears, and it seemed that she had a rather powerful one as well. She was apparently able to control dragons, after all. Issei would do some training to prepare for his upcoming match, but he had yet to face someone that really challenged him that much. He would even get an additional member to his team in the form of Lefay, thanks to Valley's influence. Valley was interested in the Excalibur fragments. Issei was able to spot potential in a person when he saw one. Valley would also offer Issei the True Longinus that was taken from Cao Cao during their fight back at Kyoto. Valley couldn't find a use for it personally, since it was designed as a major counter to devils. Valley had a feeling Issei could make use of it though. He would have Arthur throw the spear in Issei's he would have Arthur leave the spear in Issei's possession after Issei gathered the fragments for Valley. Once Valley left with said fragments, Issei would convert Levay into a second bishop. Afterward, he would focus on converting the True Longinus into an ultimate weapon for devils. He would specifically design it for Irina. It would take a full week or so for Issei to fully convert it and make the weapon safe for devils to wield. It would have taken less time if it weren't for the fact that Issei put in some programs for the True Longinus with his dark arts, such as making it to where only he, Irina, and whoever they willed at the time to wield the weapon could actually use it. He would also work on making it more wicked in appearance and nature. It would become more wicked in appearance and nature with it now being capable of harming the highest of angels and gods. Issei figured there was only befitting of a True Longinus of such magnitude that was now being wielded by devils. Eventually he would be ready for his fight against the head of the Bale family. Although his peerage was able to give Bale's own a run for their money, there were certain fights that went in Bale's favor. Bale would be paired up against Issei and the two would actually duke it out from there. It would have been the first time Issei felt a punch that actually hurt him in a long time. He would be surprised to find out how strong this dude was. Issei wasn't a slouch by any means, even in terms of physical capabilities, but he never focused solely on his physical strength. He split it with his development of magic. And even then he seemed to focus more on magic than anything in comparison to the amount of time he spent working out and exercising. This guy seemingly only focused on his physical strength, and he had reached a point where it could surpass that of magic. Issei had to admit he was impressed. He would use his magic in order to give him the advantage in battle, but his opponent would pull out their sacred gear of sorts. They were a sentient golden armor that enhanced his strength multiple times over. Issei would be forced to use fortification spells in order to avoid getting knocked out in one hit. Issei would continue casting spells to keep up, and would slowly wither away at the others' defenses. Eventually, Issei would manage to Issei would manage to land a strong enough attack to send here to the Bear family crashing to the other side of the arena. Issei wouldn't have been all that better off though. When the smoke cleared, the audience would find both Issei and Cyragorg unconscious. They would have no choice but to call it a tie. When Issei woke up, he would find out what happened to him. Issei had even more drive now. More drive to, of course, become stronger than ever. He had a feeling that even during their match, Cyragorg was holding back the true extent to his power. Issei hadn't pulled out his serpent form in that fight either, but he had a feeling it would have done little good, even if he did. He had a new goal in mind. and that was to surpass Cybergorg in physical strength. Issei would decide to invest in more demanding training regimens from that day forward, after seeing just how strong Cybergorg could get from just pure physical strength alone. Issei wanted to surpass that, and of course, surpass his father's own as well. One day while training though, Issei would sense a disturbance. He would go downstairs to see what was happening. He was in the middle of training, and for some reason he was hearing some sort of loud noise, some unusual noise being made. When he went downstairs, he would notice a strange group of people, but they looked sort of familiar in a sense. These people seemed to look sort of similar to the people that were shown fighting Valley one day while he was in Kyoto. He recognized a couple of them, but others not so much. He could only assume that they were here from, Cao Cao's hero faction, or at least that was the conclusion that Issei was making. He wondered why these people were here though. Why did they want anything to do with Issei? One of the members would actually stand up though and claim that Issei was in possession of their fallen leader's weapon, the True Longinus, the Holy Spear, or whichever names that went by. It had many titles, but the True Longinus was probably one of the most famous out of them all. They claimed that they were taking back what was rightfully theirs. Issei had no right to take their leader's weapon, their fallen leader's weapon. Issei would be confused for a second, but as soon as he mentioned something along the lines of it being their fallen leader's weapon that he was apparently in possession of, he would reflect on the day that Valley actually came to him, requesting a trade of sorts. Issei trade, the fragments of Excalibur for the spear, and Issei would remember that they were probably going to be referring to that. Valley had mentioned how he basically got this from a fight in Kyoto, and this would actually make a lot of sense to Issei. Now he realized just how important this weapon seemed to be. He actually smiled a little bit, which kind of unnerved these people. This kind of unnerved the hero faction members, or more so the misfits of the hero faction, considering the fact that the hero, the leader, hero, whatever you want to call Cao Cao, was dead. And the group was basically being disbanded at this point. This was just the scraps of the hero faction at this point that Issei was dealing with, and Issei, he would decide to look over to Arena. He would walk over to where Arena was, and he would request that she actually give him the spear. He wanted to use it for a little bit. He probably was just going to use it just to tick these guys off, but he had no issue with that whatsoever. Issei would hold the spear in his hands, and he would grin widely. His smile would have increased by the minute. Essentially, his teeth were finally beginning to show with this smile of his, and the more he smiled, the more uncomfortable that the hero faction members began to get. On top of that, he was now wielding their fallen leader's spear, and in a similar fashion to him as well. How did he know how to even wield such a weapon? It kind of made no sense to them. From their understanding, or at least the research that they had done on Issei beforehand, he had never really wielded the weapon True Longinus ever before. It was more so Irina that was wielding the weapon at this point, but now Issei was wielding it in a similar fashion somehow. They were confused. Was he maybe just watching Irina and how she trained with it? Or did he get some research on their fallen leader. They were trying to come up with any sort of conclusion, but the only real truth in the matter was Issei was just a natural with spears. That was simply it. Issei would aim the spear at the hero faction members, and he would order for them to leave his premises immediately if they did not want to die. Some of them, they would try and take the chance, believing that Issei wouldn't be able to wield the weapon properly. Sure, he may have gotten into a similar stance to Cao Cao, but that was about it. They didn't believe that he knew how to even really use it, but Issei would prove them all wrong by sending a blast of light at each of the individuals that decided to test him, and they would immediately be evaporated. Others, they would be scared. They were not expecting for Issei to be able to wield this spear in such a manner. They thought that it would have taken him a while to even be able to just get the very basics of it, considering how complex of a weapon this spear was. But Issei showed that was not the case whatsoever. A couple of the others, they would decide to flee the scene, while a few more, they would decide to die trying to fight against Issei. And of course, they would end up also spilling the beans about a certain somebody. This certain somebody being Opus. Apparently, they also sent a couple of members out to face Opus. They were planning on stealing some of her power for themselves. Sure, some of them were probably going to die, but those who managed to escape, they would be able to wield quite a bit of power. After all, infinity was something scary. The pure potential that would be in just a tiny bit of Opus's power was immeasurable in their opinions. They thought that they would probably be able to conquer the world and bring great honor to their deceased master, their fallen leader, Cao Cao. They wanted to bring honor to their late master's name, and they wanted to let the hero faction's name be spread all throughout the cosmos as well. They wanted to take over these dimensions, basically show that they were the strongest, that humans were the absolute strongest at the end of the day. Issei was a devil, a full-blooded devil, so he would never understand the struggle of the humans. But alas, their efforts would be fruitless, because Issei, he would have killed off all of the remaining members that chose not to escape, and he would end up also going to find Le Fay. She would apparently be able to be, well, it's simply like this. Issei would request that Le Fay send him over to where Opus was, and where the rest of the hero faction members were as well. He wanted to have a little chit chat with this Opus person. He was aware of the fact that Opus was a strong being, and he wanted to create a connection of sorts with this being. He figured that helping them in their fight against the hero faction members, even if he was more so just going to be doing some light work for her, he figured that it would be enough to get on her good side. Essentially, that was basically what Issei was hoping for. Le Fay, they would oblige, and Issei would be teleported over to Opus's location, the Infinite Dragon God's location, only to see that they were just about to wrap up with these guys. Or, well, that was the plan anyways, before they suddenly managed to use some sort of poison and to, well, drain some of her energy. It wouldn't have been a lot of her energy, but it would have been a pretty decent amount, to where she would have been weakened. But not to the point where they could straight up defeat her anyways. Issei would have ended up getting in the way though anyways. Issei would have gotten in the way before they ended up managing to drain even more energy out of Opus, and he would actually blast a couple of these guys with his new spear. The True Longinus actually had its perks. He never expected for it to be this useful. He would easily be able to disperse most of these hero faction members. Those who decided to run, those were the ones that were basically spared. Those who decided to go up against Issei's power, they would be the ones to die at this point, because Issei wasn't really messing around Issei wasn't really messing around anymore. He was honestly quite sick of these hero faction members. They were an annoyance. They decided to break into his home, and now they were trying to deal with a god. Dragon god. These guys were just idiotic in his opinion, and the world didn't need to have more idiotic people than they already had. These people were just a waste of genes in Issei's opinion. Issei, after he was done dealing with the hero faction, returned to Office and see them with a blob of energy in their hands. They were looking at it quite confused as to what they were going to do with it. Opus would look up to Issei and mention how they had heard of Issei. Issei was an interesting character, to say the very least. He was apparently related to the demon Trigon, or well, devil, whatever you want to really call him. Although he wasn't really much of a devil to really say. He was more like a constant. He was like a space devil of sorts. Opus didn't really know what to really call Trigon. They were aware of his presence and of his strength over the years, the centuries, all that sort, but they weren't really sure what exactly he was. He didn't really fit properly into any of the categories. Opus would mention how Issei was Trigon's son, and this was intriguing. Opus wanted to know why Issei even decided to help her in the first place. Issei would mention that, well, he wanted to get on Opus's good side. He figured that Opus was a strong individual. They were literally called the Infinite Dragon God, so he figured that title was given to her for a pretty good reason. It had to be related to strength and abilities after all. So Issei wanted some special request from Opus after helping her, even though she may have not really needed the help that much. But this request would be simple: to train him. Opus would be confused. Train him? Why? Issei would simply explain that he had a goal. He wanted to become strong enough to eventually defeat his father in combat. Opus would agree to train Issei after hearing this. They didn't really understand it that much, but hey, and maybe they could get some sort of excitement out of this. It would help with their boredom essentially. And Opus would mention one thing. They wanted to find out what to do with this ball of energy. They were looking for suggestions on what to do with it now. Sure, she could probably just absorb it back into herself, but she figured that would be kind of boring. She wanted to experiment, you could say. Issei would be confused, but he would make a little joke essentially, mentioning how, hey, if Opus was really that bored, why not just make a daughter out of this ball of energy? Opus would actually do exactly that, and this would honestly surprise Issei. He didn't know that Opus had that sort of power to do such a thing. And Opus would go on to even state that Issei was going to be the one to take care of them while she helped with this training. Issei wouldn't even bother saying anything. He knew that if he even tried to make a rebuttal against Opus, it would not go in his favor whatsoever. So he would just exempt his new responsibility, and they would pretty much be on their way. Opus would go on to stay with Issei for a while and help with his training. Although this training would persist more of Issei getting beat down by Opus over and over again, each and every day. When it came on to Opus's daughter, Lilith, they would also help in their training sessions. They would both hold back, of course, but even then, Issei would still suffer from getting his bones broken day in and day out. Sure, he had somebody to heal him at every single time, but that still pretty much hurt him. That was still something that hurt quite a bit. Getting your bones shattered every single day. But then again, Issei was kinda used to it. He had dealt with an abusive mother when he was younger, after all. Somebody that he frankly didn't really care that much about. But she was still his mother. And when it came on to Opus now, this was practically just bringing back memories of how he was when he was younger. How he used to always get beaten up, but he was more resilient now. He actually had a proper goal. He wasn't working for anybody else. He was doing this for himself, which made it feel a whole lot more better, essentially. With all of this training, Issei would realize that he just couldn't brute force his way out of everything. He would have to also develop more tricks along the line as well, which would cause him to unlock more abilities. He would understand that some of them were from his father and some from his mother, but with each of these abilities, Issei would essentially become stronger, just not physically strong anymore. He was more focused on abilities. Sure, he was physically strong. He was probably one of the strongest people physically in this world at this point. But Issei was also more into magical abilities. His father, he had heard many rumors, many legends of his father basically being able to turn people into stone, or like petrification abilities, being able to warp reality, stand on magma with no sort of issue whatsoever, fly, all of these different things that Trigon was capable of doing, and Issei was just beginning to touch the very tips of it, touch the very tip of the iceberg in terms of his potential. Issei would eventually figure that he may want to test his strength against his father. He wasn't sure if he was actually a match for his father yet, but it would be worth a shot. Lilith would also accompany Issei. Lilith was a strange individual in Issei's opinion, because of the fact that she didn't cry, she didn't laugh, she didn't do anything that a normal child would do. Instead, Lilith would just be there like a doll. She had the same face as her mother, a very calm poker face. It wasn't really giving any sort of emotion at any point. Even her voice was monotonous. There was no expression whatsoever on their face, and Issei found that to be kind of creepy. But if she insisted on following Issei to face off against Trigon, then who was he to say no? Who was he to reject this poor girl's request? Especially with the fact that this girl was probably stronger than Issei anyways. He had experienced what it felt like to get punched by this person multiple times before, and he wasn't really in a mood for wanting to, well, get beat up again. So Issei would end up having Lefay summon a portal for him to Trigon's dimension. After all, she was probably one of the people who would know at this point how to get into contact with a being like Trigon, considering the amount of magic that she had. Issei would be surprised to see his father for the very first time after he doesn't even really remember how long it's been since he'd seen his father. Or maybe this was the first time he'd seen his father, he wasn't really even quite sure. But Trigon had apparently seen Issei before. He would immediately recognize his son and even call him out by name. He would question why he was here, why Issei would bring himself to his dimension, the place where he basically ruled over all, to which Issei would say that he simply wanted to test his strength against his father, because he had an upcoming game when one of these days he was going to be having a sort of raiding game, or like the Azazel Cup, whatever you want to really call it. Issei wanted to test his strength before that day, if ever came. His father would laugh hearing this. Of course Issei wanted to test his strength against him. Who wouldn't want to test his strength against the almighty Trigon? But he would question why this little girl was here as well. Her energy seemed familiar. She also looked quite familiar as well, but he couldn't really point a finger towards who it reminded him of. Issei would explain that Lilith was essentially the daughter of Opus, which would surprise Trigon to an extent. He wasn't expecting that out of all people, the infinite dragon god Opus would ever have any sort of offspring. Issei would explain the whole process, and it would make a lot more sense to Trigon afterwards. But that wasn't why they were here. They were here to fight. And Issei would explain that Lilith was here to also test his strength against Trigon. Trigon would oblige, and he would easily take pretty much both of them down. Issei would get back up though. Both of them would get back up, and they would try again multiple times, but overall Trigon would show himself to be superior, until Issei ended up using more than just his physical strength. He would try and use his other abilities as well in order to combat against his father, and Issei would prove to be more of a formidable opponent, using more of his abilities rather than just physical strength. He understood that he was trying to be more like Cyrogoric to an extent. He kinda idolized Cyrogoric in terms of him being able to just become one of the strongest within the world, just with his physical strength alone. And he was giving himself a handicap at first, but Issei understood that if he was going to really pose any sort of threat to his father, he could not go in with any sort of handicaps like he ever tried with Cyrogoric. Cyrogoric, he only had physical strength. That's the only thing he could train over those years. Issei didn't have that issue. He had both physical strength and magic, all of these different abilities, yet Issei wanted to for some reason handicap himself. But now that he had stopped, he was able to actually kind of outpace his father at moments. Lilith would also be able to have her own fair share of punches towards the great Trigon as well. Punches that, well, Trigon would actually feel, although overall this was light work in comparison to what he dealt with when it came on to Opus. Opus was more of a strong individual than what it was like dealing with both Issei and Lilith. He'd also dealt with the Great Red a couple of times as well, but overall this was an entertaining fight for Trigon, although the two would still lose in the end. Trigon would actually congratulate his son on actually becoming strong. He just needed to become stronger though. And of course, over time Issei would become stronger, but for now, Issei would just understand that he still had a long way to go before he would ever be able to really hold his own against his father one-on-one. But for now, he had another competition to really worry about. This competition, of course, being the Azazel Cup. What was so interesting about the Azazel Cup though was that it was apparently a competition where anybody could just make a team of pretty much anybody. It didn't necessarily matter if you had a peerage or not. This wasn't really focused on peerages anymore. This was focused on just individuals getting together. And once Issei heard about this, he would immediately go and recruit Valley for his team. These two were already rather powerful on their own, but together they were practically nigh unstoppable. And then Issei would also get his hands on Ophis. He would convince her to join this fight simply because he would give her sweets, lots and lots of sweets afterwards. He had noticed after a time that Ophis seemed to have an attraction to sweet foods, candy, snacks, those sorts. So that would be Issei's bribe or bargain towards Ophis. Ophis would oblige after hearing this, and of course this match would be a slaughter. The whole competition would be a slaughter for these three individuals. Issei didn't really need much more people afterwards. He may have gotten a couple more people, maybe just to fill up spots, but that was about it. They were literally only there to be placeholders for his team if he didn't have enough. And these three would just go on to, well, pretty much neg, you could say. They didn't really have any sort of issue at all during the competition, because how can you really compare to these three? Especially Ophis, the infinite dragon god, practically one of the strongest individuals within their whole universe. The only people that could really rival the one known as Ophis were Trigon and the Great Red. But they weren't really here. Nobody could really get in contact with them. Many people were actually surprised to find that Issei was able to get into contact with Ophis in the first place. They seemed like such a rare individual to even meet. The fact that Issei could even interact with Ophis and convince her to join his team was a feat in and of itself. So of course in the end these three would win the competition, and Issei would just go on to get stronger, learn more abilities, and he would eventually go on to fight his father once more. But this would be around, say, 5 to 10 years later. Issei would be fighting Assad. It would be a long, hard-fought battle, but in the end, Issei would prove himself to be victorious. Valley would actually applaud Issei after he basically took over his father's realm as well, mentioning how he had also done his sort of thing with a relative as well. He would mention his, well, grandfather? Or, well, just a relative. He wouldn't even really mention the guy's name, but he had basically been able to fight him a good couple years back, and this time he managed to win in the end. He managed to get his revenge after the years of suffering, so he understood where Issei was coming from. Issei would mention that he did not necessarily hate his father or anything. He just wanted to defeat him in battle and just take over. It just seemed like a natural calling, especially after his mother would often train him just so that she could get revenge on the devil faction or whatever, because of the fact that they managed to dethrone her because, well, she just wasn't that strong. In Canteria Leviathan, she was not strong enough to take on people like Sir Zex, so she decided to put all of her hope and dreams into her offspring. Well, her offspring being Issei, and she would have been more than willing to have it be that her offspring had the DNA of Trigon as well. But now that Issei had a DNA of both these individuals, Issei decided to focus his efforts on becoming stronger than his father so that he could take over his throne, rather than take over this other throne, this devil faction throne, the one with like the Leviathan, Grimoires, all those sort of people. He wasn't really interested in dealing with that sort of ruling kingdom. He wanted his father's throne. That was the one that interested him. And now that he finally got it, a lot of things were going to change. But yeah, that's basically it for the What If people. It is your boy King Ty next signing out. Peace.